Right, we've got a good number, so I think I'm going to start. We're about 1 minute past 3. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us in what should be a really interesting event. And we're going to be discussing a lot to do with international footballers and moving between different countries and different leagues. My name is Ben Gibson. I'm going to be the host for today. I'm a chartered financial planner at Tilney. I work as part of the sports and entertainment team where my clients are predominantly Premier League footballers. Before we get underway, I think it's worth just explaining a little bit about today's format. We've got 5 industry experts on the panel for what should be quite a relaxed, open discussion on how we all work with professional athletes and some of the obstacles that people face as part of their day-to-day roles. There's definitely some areas that I want us to cover off today, such as player transfers between leagues and between countries, agency fees, and of course, Brexit. But I also want to make sure that we allow plenty of time for some of your questions as well, which you can all submit using the Q&A functionality at the bottom. You can direct them to anybody or somebody in particular. If not, I will go through and sort of point them in the right direction. We'll also try and get through, like I say, as many of those as possible, and we'll try to finish on time. We're actually recording today's event as well, and we can send this round to you if any of your colleagues or any of your associates were unable to join us live. So I'm joined today with my colleague Adam Osper, who heads up the sports and entertainment team at Tilney, and he's worked in this space for over 12 years. I've got Pete Hackleton, the head of sports at Safri Champness, a UK-based tax and accountancy firm. I'm also excited to be joined by Carlos Canero and Eduardo Oliver, who are both senior associates at Spanish tax and legal firm Sen Ferrero, which will give us a really good international take on some of the issues that players face. And last but no means least, we've got Jonathan Beckett, head of talent at Arete, and they specialize in player representation. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so we can see everybody's face. I'm going to start with you, Jonathan. You were involved in a really interesting player transfer. So you took a player from the UK Championship over to the Chinese Super League. That player became the first naturalized individual to play for the Chinese national team, which is a very, very unique story. Tell us a little bit about it and how this came about.
Yeah, fine. So I guess it's a really interesting story, and it goes way back. So Nico came through at Arsenal, played for England youth systems, but always wanted to play, I guess, international football. And his mother's Chinese, so China was always an option for him. Didn't make it at Arsenal sort of long term, I guess, and moved to Brentford, where he spent 5 years. And we explored numerous different ways to, I guess, try and find that opportunity for Nico to represent China. And it was every turning, everybody said it's impossible. No, it can't be done because Chinese citizenship is very difficult to get. You also have to give up your British citizenship at the same time. There's no dual nationality. And I guess working with Brentford, to be fair, because they moved one of their players previously, Lasse Vibe, to China. So we worked with them, also a Chinese partner based in Beijing. And I guess through that process, it was working with the Chinese partner, the Chinese government, in terms of the naturalization of Nico, finding a club in the Chinese Super League, Beijing Guan, in the capital, which was great for him. But I think also, you know, the immigration side of it, the contract side of it was very unique, I guess, as well. But I think for him, it's been an incredible journey. But it's a team effort, but it took 12 months really from start to finish.
Well, you've kind of touched on it there. So from the outside looking in, that Chinese market looks very complicated to navigate, especially for a UK agent, very different to the UK industry or the UK market. So from a legal side of things, from a language barrier side of things, maybe a political or a financial position, what complications did you encounter along that 12-month period?
Yeah, I guess definitely, dealing with the Chinese is very different to anything I've experienced before. I think just culturally, the way they do business, you know, everything is very, very different. You know, a lot is done on trust, I guess, and honor. You know, I found that everything had to be pretty much face to face. So there's a lot of long meetings. But I think having a team of people, we had a lawyer that we worked very closely on the contracts. You get an English version and a Chinese version. You know, when we first received it, they were quite different, I guess, when the translations were done. So you have to be sort of very careful. We worked with Liz Ellen, who was at Mishcon at the time, and now at Levida, was brilliant, to be fair, and a massive help for us sort of through that process. But I guess the contracts, you know, the language is a real difficulty. You're sitting in a room, you know, and there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 Chinese people all speaking Chinese, all speaking very clearly about you, but you don't necessarily know what's going on. So they have a very different way of doing things. I found that we'd feel as though the deal is done, and then you wouldn't hear anything for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then all of a sudden they expect the original paperwork to be signed and in China within 24 hours, and you're literally jumping on a plane to get to Beijing. So yeah, very different, but I think a lot of respect to, you know, the Chinese, how they do things. If you find yourself in a Chinese restaurant in Beijing, you might try a few different things that you wouldn't normally have. Plus, if you go to a karaoke bar, you know, after hours, then you're in a good place with them. They don't take everyone there.
So there might be a few people watching today who potentially have a player who's quite interested or excited to go over to China, maybe for the financial reasons. So is there any tips or guidance that you could offer them, apart from getting in touch with you to help get the deal? Is there anything that you could offer?
Yeah, I guess it's finding people that genuinely have that link to China and somebody that I guess has a track record of doing business over there, because I've found definitely a lot of people claim they can do it. And all of a sudden you end up with 3, 4, 5 different agents all working on the same deal and all trying to, I guess, get cut in one way or another, and it gets very convoluted. So I think this, as simple as you can make it, is probably my advice. And I think if you find the right person in China that you can work with as well, that has to be key.
Good. So I'm going to bring in Pete Hackleton now. You're on mute, so I'm just going to remind you to come off mute. But I'm going to bring you in, Pete, because you work with a huge amount of international footballers. So thinking about things from the opposite direction, so people coming into the UK from overseas, what are those important initial steps where you get involved in the transaction, and what things should the agent or player sort of think about from a tax side of things?
Yeah, I mean, from the tax side, there's the key tax issues to consider on the deal itself. So I'm sure we'll come on to things like image rights a little bit later. Are the club themselves willing to look at an image rights proportion on the deal? Taxation of agents' fees, again, I'm sure we'll come on to later, is always a fairly topical one. And it's something that HMRC are very focused on at the moment. The club will typically pay a proportion of the agent's fee on behalf of the player, which should be taxed as a benefit in kind, and what proportion that is, we can come on to a little bit later. I mean, just thinking about this in a wider sense, yesterday when I was preparing, I was just thinking about when a player comes to the UK and what they actually have to do first and foremost. The big issue we've actually got at the moment.
Now I've lost Pete. I'm not sure if anybody else can still hear Pete or not. Sounded as though he's getting into a very, very exciting point.
Get a national insurance number. So
Pete, you're back. We lost you for a second then. If you could just repeat that point.
Okay, sorry. I was just saying, just starting with the very basics, when a player comes to the UK, they need to get a national insurance number. And that usually is very simple. You send somebody down to the job centre and they get it, or the club gets somebody in from the local employment office to issue those national insurance numbers. But unfortunately, that's not been possible since COVID. So we've got a whole backlog of players who don't have social security numbers. They're not registered on the system. And so things like making sure that the tax on the benefits are coded into the player's monthly pay just hasn't been possible. Once they've registered, things like making sure they're registered to file tax returns in the UK, making sure that they've completed their filings in whatever country they've come from, whether they, if they come from Spain or Germany, they've completed their domestic filings, and they can take any credit for any tax here as well. So it's just making sure that the whole piece is covered, not just coming into the UK, but making sure that anything in the previous jurisdiction has already been taken into account.
I'm just going to touch on that national insurance number point as well, because I think we both are familiar with one individual in particular who's been waiting for a national insurance number quite some time. what's the implications of not getting that set up? Apart from it not being coded by the club, is there any sort of clearly tax implications that you may face as a player?
I mean, the main one, first of all, funnily enough, is in order to file your tax return, it's obviously all online filing now, you literally can't submit a tax return without a unique tax reference number, a UTR. To get a UTR, usually you get your national insurance number, you write to HMRC and you get a UTR. But without the national insurance number, you don't have a UTR. So for some clients, we've just been filing. There is a paper form that you can submit to get a UTR. We've sent those in. For half of those clients, we've received that back. For half of the clients, we haven't received anything back. And of course, there's no reference number that you can chase HMRC for. You've just sent a letter into this system, which is not great. You know, we contacted the head of the football unit at HMRC on this to say, listen, HMRC are missing out on revenues. Players want to code in the tax on the benefits and there's extra tax to be collected. Can you help? But, you know, and, you know, they've said HMRC have other priorities at the moment, and that's absolutely right. We recognise furlough system, you know, loans to businesses that are struggling are important, but equally this is quite important as well. So, you know, I can see a situation where players might be receiving penalties for late filing of returns that are all prepared and ready to go. We just literally can't press the button without the tax reference numbers. So these are things that we're going to have to prepare for, I guess.
And I'm guessing, obviously, the nature of today's call is international transfers or moving of players. I'm guessing that if players then go overseas before they've had a chance to pay the relevant taxes, it creates a huge headache for the HMRC or for people like you to try and sort everything out in the background.
You're causing me anxiety now, Ben, by suggesting players might have left before they've even registered. And, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, it can cause big issues. And I was thinking about, you know, players moving out, and it's the opposite of players coming in. We've got to make sure UK filings are complete. They then go and they become resident somewhere else, and we've got to make sure that there's no double taxation. We often come across those kind of issues on loan deals. Of course, players leaving the UK for maybe 6 or 12 months. When actually they never cease to be UK resident. You've still got a UK filing obligation, perhaps UK tax to pay, but they're having tax withheld at source in the local territory, and you've got 2 lots of tax. So those kind of issues are fairly commonplace. But yeah, they're all quite difficult.
So you mentioned it a minute ago. Let's touch on image rights deals or image rights structures, because it's something that's very heavily publicised, especially when you read about potential transfers either coming into the UK or between clubs. We've seen famous examples of transfers stalling because Club A might own the rights to a particular player's image or even a manager's image. How have those structures changed over the years?
I mean, you know, I guess the headline is, you know, image rights does still work in the UK if it's done properly. I think probably there's plenty of people on the call who've seen me do maybe 2 hours on image rights themselves. I'm definitely not doing that today. You know, it does still work. I think the main thing that HMRC focus on now is the use of any offshore companies. If you're using offshore companies, HMRC will be really aggressive in pursuing it. Technically, we would say it does still work, but HMRC are determined to pursue a couple of offshore image rights cases through to the courts. So unless you've got a really strong story, it's probably unadvisable. And I think, you know, a UK company itself now, the UK corp tax rate at the moment is 19%. You know, you've got a significant saving over and above salary of 45 and 2% national insurance. You're talking about close to 30% saving. So it's worthwhile doing. Just got to make sure it's within the right proportions, and everything's properly documented, rights properly assigned, and everything's set up correctly in the first place.
So just touching on that point you mentioned regarding overseas image rights companies. So perhaps you can just give a bit of, I appreciate not a 2-hour talk on it, but just a couple of points around where an overseas image rights company would work in your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, so where you've got an overseas image rights company, you would usually do it alongside a UK company. You'd have the UK rights in the UK company, rest of the world rights in an overseas company. And that overseas company then can contract with commercial partners. So where you have a player who's moved to the UK, so they're resident non-domiciled in the UK, so they're subject to UK tax on their UK income. Anything they earn outside the UK is not subject to UK tax. So if they do a deal with Pepsi in Asia, which is completely outside the UK, there are no UK services paid to the non-UK company, that's not taxable, and that's clear. But HMRC's issue is where that overseas company then contracts with a club in the UK for use of overseas rights, HMRC are now arguing that that's a UK source payment because it comes from a UK club, and therefore all of that is taxable. And if you only have one bank account in that overseas company, all of those funds can potentially be tainted. So you could do the overseas structure with 2 bank accounts, keep club income separate from other commercial, or not even do a contract with a club in relation to overseas rights. It might just be in a personal context.
Okay, I'm just going to bring Carlos into the conversation now. So one of the reasons why we wanted to bring in an overseas expert into today's session is really to highlight the differences really between European jurisdictions and how, as professional advisors, we really need to work as a team with our players as they move around the globe. So Carlos, we've spoken about image rights deals from a UK perspective there. How does that position change in Spain in particular?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. The Spanish position has changed a lot some years ago because starting from the final conclusion, image rights structures in Spain are not really effective in most of cases. Okay, traditionally, the image rights structures that were in place in Spain until, let's say, 7-8 years ago were on the basis that 85% of the income of the club has to be paid at least as a salary, and the other 50% may be paid as image rights. Okay, so the common structure was assigning the image rights to a company, and that 15% of the income was taxed at a rate about Spanish income 25% instead of the 45-50% that was the salary income. So that's why that's how the sports people and this kind of persons work through these structures and these assignments. However, some years ago, with the transfer pricing regulations, the Spanish tax authority established the criteria that the image right company had to pay back to the player most of that income. So at the end of the road, and in practice, everything was taxed at 45%. So that makes the most common structures ineffective. There are some kind of exceptions in companies that deal with the image rights of a lot of people that have employees, but that's not the common situation of most of the players that have 1, 2, 3 sponsors. So we have to say that it's not the case in Spain like in the UK. So there's no a good point, a good way to explode image rights.
So I suppose just following on from that then,
yeah,
with clients of, use Pete as an example, if he had a player that was moving to Spain and you were sort of working on that deal together, would you be advising to close the UK-based company or the company that's been set up before they arrive in Spain?
Definitely, I would recommend, and always upon Peter's green light, to say, okay, the UK structure is no longer effective in Spain. In Spain, you have to deal on other grounds. So that's why it's important to count with an expert in each jurisdiction, because otherwise we are completely lost.
Yeah, just to jump in there, Ben, as well. In relation to when a player does leave the UK, if that's the situation, and Carlos says from a Spanish perspective, an image rights company has no advantage, what we would look to do is wind the company up while the player is still UK resident. So we could do a solvent liquidation, and that way the player could get the cash out at a 20% tax rate in the UK prior to becoming Spanish resident.
Yeah, and also with other kind of examples with split year, it's effective. So it's a good idea. Yes.
Just wanted to touch on, Carlos, another one for you. There was some very high-profile, noticeable tax underpayment cases publicised in Spain. Perhaps you can give a bit of guidance on what was actually happening there.
Yeah. In a nutshell, it happened that that 50% that I told you before was not paid back to the player. The common structure was that that 50% was assigned to an overseas company, traditionally in a territory with low or nil taxation, and that company, which was the assignee of the image rights, didn't pay back the player. The Spanish tax authorities said that and tried to allocate all the income as an individual being tax resident in Spain. And considering that in most of the cases you can imagine, and everybody has talked about, the amounts were so big that in several cases there were criminal procedures on that. So they use it as a threat to say, okay, let's make an agreement. Let's don't go on court, and let's make a deal to avoid you, because if you are condemned, you may have to face to prison charges. So most of the players reach an agreement with the tax authorities about that.
And is that being completely sorted now, or is there a historical problem?
There's a player, which is Xabi Alonso, I think most of you know, fought against them. And the first stage he won, but it has been appealed by the prosecutor, and he has been charged with 2 other tax additional frauds. So they are trying to win that case with all these possibilities to force everybody to settle. And now people is seeing what's happening, or what happened with other cases, and nobody's putting in practice that kind of structures.
Yeah, makes sense. So Adam, Oscar, I'm just going to bring you in at this point. So we've spoken quite a lot around the contractual side of things, or image rights and taxation, but I'm quite interested to hear, I suppose, from you on the financial planning considerations for players either coming to the UK or leaving the UK. So perhaps you can explain some of the key things that you do and put in place.
I think when somebody comes to the UK, it's it depends on where they've come from. Normally it's a process to get to the UK, because people see the Premier League as the place where you can earn the most money financially. So it's an opportunity for these footballers to maybe set themselves up for the rest of their lives when they eventually leave the UK. The challenges that you face initially are obviously language is the first one, how good their English is, if they speak any English at all. And then from there, you need to work out how you communicate with them through translators, because financial products, the terminology, the wording is completely different depending on what jurisdiction you're in. And then you need to understand, you know, I suppose the age is quite important of the player as well. When somebody comes to the UK, you don't need to declare any offshore income or gains. You know, you've got seven years, you've got to remain in the UK or be in the UK before you actually have to declare overseas income and gains. So there's opportunities to structure investment portfolios outside of the UK where they can benefit from gross roll up. And then you need to talk about currency. What currency does somebody want to invest in? Do they want to invest in sterling whilst they're remaining in here, or dollar or euro? Dollar, you know, is very popular for South American, or euro for obvious reasons. And then understanding the different types of products and contracts. So when somebody comes to the UK, contractually, if they signed a 5-year deal and they were to get injured, there's no contractual obligation for that whole contract to be paid. So there's a particular type of insurance that you might take out to protect against loss of earnings if they couldn't play football anymore. And that differs depending on what country you're in. So in Holland, someone's entire contract is covered, no matter what the length, if they become injured and they can't play. In Germany, it's extremely short. In Germany, you only get paid for 6 weeks. So you need completely different insurances depending on where you're at. And then retirement planning is an interesting one, because in the UK, pension legislation has changed quite a lot. And historically, before 2006, you could draw your pension if you were a member of a scheme before 2006 at 35. And that's changed now. And any pension that you have is in line with normal retirement age at 55. In addition to that, you can only, if you're a high earner, which most of the clients that we deal with are, you can only have £4,000 a year going into your pension. If you compare that to Holland, contractually, you're forced to pay a percentage of your earnings out of every single monthly payment into a pension. And that pension from retirement age until 67 pays you an income throughout that period of time, regardless of the level or the amount. So there's different types of retirement planning and things that you need to address.
You've kind of touched on it there. So very short careers is what you're saying, that you need to almost put a plan in place so that when somebody retires at a younger age than the people who are on this call today, they've got sufficient assets in place to survive the rest of their life income-wise.
Yeah, and when players come from overseas, typically they will have family that comes with them, and depending on where they're from, if they're South American, they'll have very big families back there. So there is an obligation for them to support their families. So making sure that they do plan and make the most of their money is in that short space of time is key. because they could be in the UK for 2 years. It could be 7, 8, 9 years. There probably aren't too many players that actually play in the UK from overseas for 8, 9 years plus.
So there's a lot of education that goes into those initial conversations and that you're having.
Yeah, I mean, the education part is key, and often initially, depending on where somebody's from, we'll have to take translators with us because, like I said, you're talking about financial instruments, shares, bonds, investments, inflation, growth rates, currency, and you need to explain that to somebody that may know very, very basic English. So it can be quite a long process to go through that to get them to understand sort of like financial planning and investment management or wealth management generally.
Yeah, well, I'm going to bring Pete back in now because I suppose working together with other industry professionals. So Pete, we spoke briefly about non-doms coming to the UK from an image rights perspective, but what happens if a non-dom comes to the UK and then spends time working outside of the UK? So I'm thinking European football is a great example.
Yeah, there is a relief for the first 3 tax years you're in the UK called Overseas Workday Relief, which can be very valuable to the players. So if you think of a usual Premier League club, pre and post season tours becoming more and more popular outside the UK. Perhaps now that we have winter breaks, training camp in the winter. Some clubs, if they get knocked out of the FA Cup, will go warm weather training in Dubai for a week, and obviously 8, 9 clubs are in European competition where you've got 1 or 2 nights outside the UK, maybe 3 times during the group stage, knockout stages. So if you take that into account, that may be, let's say, 28 days outside the UK. It might be a month outside the UK, which is a 12th of your annual salary. So if you've got a player who's on maybe 5 million a year, that could be £400,000 worth of salary, which relates to non-UK work days. So there's a mechanism to meet, which means that relevant proportion of the salary has to be paid outside the UK and not brought back into the UK under that remittance basis. But if those conditions are met, then you can effectively exclude that proportion of the salary from UK taxation, which is a big saving. There's a slight grey area around international duty. The claims that we're submitting at the moment, we're including international duty on those claims. Because we believe that the players are still employed by the club for those days when they're on international duty. They're still training and keeping fit, therefore they're non-UK work days. I expect we probably will get a challenge from that. Yeah, I think that's something that we'll have to argue with HMRC down the line.
And are players aware of this when they come to the UK? Is it something that agents are? Is that kind of where you get involved to make sure?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if I think of 2 or 3 of the bigger deals this summer, it's been, the overseas lawyers or agents have come to us to ask about something like image rights. We've had to flag probably the good news, which is Overseas Workday Relief could leave the clients with a significant tax refund in the UK. And then the bad news being the agent's fees, which the club will pay, and there's going to be a significant benefit in kind, and quite often they might match off against each other. But just, I guess, touching on the point Adam just made, there is an education process, and quite often we'll talk this. Obviously Carlos knows this inside out now. He's been involved for a long time, but for some of the lawyers who aren't as probably on top of the UK tax as Sam Ferrero, there's a process of talking with the lawyers and the agents to bring them up to speed. And then perhaps they want to bring the player in and explain it to them. Or sometimes they just say the player doesn't need to know. Let's just make sure we'll sort it all out, and we'll make sure we do the best possible for the player. So to Adam's point about that education for the players, sometimes it's a gradual process. When they come in and they're 19, 20, 21, it's, they're not going to sit down and understand it. But as they get older and mature and they want to know more about what's going on, that's the right time for them to understand things.
Eduardo, I'm going to come to you now, finally get you into the conversation. I want to talk about Brexit because, well, in the UK, we're clearly hearing a huge amount about it. Obviously, you're in Spain. We're quite keen to get your views on that. But that world after the 1st of January, which is approaching really, really quickly. Clearly, La Liga has a huge amount of talent. We're always quite keen to see that talent come across to the Premier League. Do you see a problem with Spanish-based players coming over to England in the future following the Brexit deal?
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everybody. Yes, I think that there are going to be several problems, not only for Spanish players, also for the other non-UK resident players or coaches, because with regard to the new bureaucracy in UK after January 1st. We have to remember that on December 1st of 2020, the FA announced the revised governing body endorsement rules applicable to non-UK male and female footballers transferring to English club after Brexit. No? Prior to enforcement of the 2021 governing body endorsement rules, only the non-European nationals were required to satisfy certain criteria, meaning footballers from the European Union had an automatic right of entry to play professional football in England should an English club wish to seek them. No? Under the new governing body rules, in light of Brexit, the FA has extended these criteria in a revised form to all non-UK nationals. This means that footballers from the European Union and outside transferred to English football clubs after Brexit will also be subject to a points-based immigration system. The four key features of the points-based system, for example, are auto-pass system in place for players satisfying a certain percentage of appearance for national teams in the FIFA top 50, points-based system for players who do not qualify under the previous point of the auto-pass route, and they have to obtain 15 points in total from any of the 6 criteria as follows. Senior and youth international appearance, quality of the selling club, base of the league they are in, league position and progression in a continental competition, club appearance based on domestic league and continental competition minutes, etc. The players that accumulating the requisite amount of points will earn a GBE automatically, while players just below the threshold may be considered for a GBE by an exceptions panel, and the exceptions panel hearing for players preventing from achieving the 15 points due to exceptional circumstances and or under 21 players who score between 10 and 14 points. Okay. By other side, the non-UK resident players transfer to an English club or a British club during the transfer window before January 1st of 2021, depending on how long he or she has been in the UK, the player will be eligible to apply either for settled status. Okay, the settled status is for the player who was in UK for 5 or 4 years, or pre-settled status for less than 5 years. Okay, the players who apply and receive pre-settled status can be upgraded to settled status upon completion of 5 years. Okay. By other side, the new rule included that a maximum of 3 under 21 non-UK players permitted per team in January 2021 windows, increasing to 6 per season moving forward. The system is the joint objectives of the Premier League and FLA and the FA, allowing access to the best players and future talent for clubs, as well as safeguarding the English teams by ensuring opportunities for home ground players. Okay, this enables the requirement of the best players around the world to train and playing together with home ground talent. And under FIFA rules, the UK exit from the European players will also mean that clubs will not be able to send players from overseas until they are 18. Okay. About these matters, we have to, first of all, we have to remember the general rule of the FIFA regulations, the article 19.1, that includes that the international transfer are only permitted if the player is over the age of 18. However, there are 5 exceptions to the original rule. Of relevance to Brexit is that exception included in the article 19.2, paragraph B, that shows if the transfer takes place within the territory of the European Union or European European area, and the player is aged between 16 and 18, this is permitted. But after Brexit, these are about to change. The UK no longer be a part of the European Union. Okay, therefore, English, Scottish, Wales, or Northern Irish club will be unable to benefit from the exception under the Article 19.2 paragraph B, meaning that they will not be permitted to sing between 16 and 18-year-old players from the European Union. However, I don't remember the date. I think that in December 4th, FIFA amended its regulation to clarify that the transfer of minors between UK associations would be possible. Okay.
Yeah. So Jonathan, just from an agent's perspective, I just wanted to pick up on your views on, is that going to change your role at all in terms of how you try and approach or work with younger athletes sort of over the age of 18 or bringing them potentially to the UK?
Yeah, I think it definitely changes things slightly. I think Eduardo touched on all the points really well, to be fair. And I think over the last few years, you've definitely seen the likes of Man City, Chelsea, the big clubs bringing in a lot of European talent at the age of 16. And I think they all went pretty heavy this summer. That's not going to happen, moving forward. So I think in that sense, there's a big change. I had a couple of clients over the last 12 months that trialed at Bayern Munich, Porto, Besiktas, but that sort of wouldn't really be able to happen moving forward as well. So I think it definitely changes things. I think also you're probably having to plan further ahead, and sort of really look 2-3 years down the line if you're wanting to bring a player maybe from Europe to England, and based on that point system where you've got to get 15 points, the league that they're playing in, the club that they're playing at, all of those types of things really come into play. And I think if you can get into the right league, then that has a huge, I guess, added weight in terms of the point system, but also then all the other points that Eduardo touched on definitely helps for sure.
So there's a question coming from Tom Murray. So I just want to pick up on that because it kind of touches on that point that, do you see a change in the quality of players coming to the UK? And I suppose what advice would you give for agents who recruit players usually from Africa or South America going forward in light of this?
Yeah, for me, I don't think necessarily the quality of player will be worse or better. I think the top players coming in will still be the top players coming in. I think all the English clubs look for the top quality, and those players will be quite easy for those guys to come in, whether it's through the auto pass route, through playing international football, or they'll be playing in one of the top leagues. So in that sense, it will be okay. I think, again, similarly, if you're coming from Africa, into Europe, it's then finding the right leagues in Europe that then in 2-3 years down the line, you then will then have your 15 points and qualify to come across.
So Adam, just picking up from a regulated financial advisor perspective, how does Brexit change the way that you will be working with the players that you work with?
My answer's not anywhere near as detailed as Eduardo's. So Brexit from the 1st of January causes a big problem for financial institutes working with anybody, not specifically sports people or footballers. If you have clients that you look after as a UK regulated firm and they're based in Europe, you can no longer work with them. It's as simple as that. If you have UK expats, so British people living overseas, there are potential ways in which you can continue to work with them, but they must have a UK residency, their own house, which isn't let out, and strong ties to the UK. If you're a business like we are, where you have an office in a European or an EU destination, you can continue to work with those clients, provided they are then re-registered or effectively moved from your UK financial planning firm to your EU-based financial planning firm, and then they're effectively serviced from that office within the EU.
Okay, so I'm going to move things on just because I'm conscious of time now. So I want to move on to agents' fees, because Pete mentioned them earlier on. We see huge figures being highlighted in the press for the biggest transfers that you see. Often the media will portray agents as taking money from clubs. So Jonathan, I'm just going to come to you. If you could explain briefly, for anyone who's unfamiliar, the difference between what the club pays and what the player pays for the different services.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I guess again, touching on that, the media always highlights, I guess, the outlayers, should we say, in terms of, the big deals for Pogba, where an agent is getting paid a lot of money. Of course, there's a lot of money in the game, but I think, generally there's an industry standard, but it could work in a number of different ways. But I think, the industry standard, I would say, is the agent will charge 5% of the guaranteed sum, that a player is earning. That's usually paid, again, industry standard across the length of that contract. Of course, all of these things are up for negotiation, but I guess the club, I've been working in the industry for 12 years. The club has always paid the full amount of the agency fee, so the player themselves don't actually make a payment to the agent in that sense. But again, every time that I've done it, it's sort of been on a dual representation agreement where it's been split. So you're providing services to the club and you're providing services to the player. 50-50, is again the norm. And I guess the key thing that the player needs to be aware of is that there is tax, that they will have to pay on the agency fee, but only on the side where I guess the club is paying for the player services. So they'll be paying tax generally on 50% of the agency fee.
Yeah, Pete, I think that's perfect to bring you in now, and just you touched on it earlier, that benefit in kind side of things from playing on behalf of the player. Can you just explain that in a little bit of detail, or how this should be avoided?
Yeah, I mean, JB's spot on there. That, I've been, I think it was 2005. I first went to a Premier League meeting where this was discussed, and things haven't changed. Typically the agent's fee is paid in full by the club, and it's split on a 50-50 basis. So just to use some numbers, let's say the agency fee is £100,000 a year for easy numbers. On a 50-50 basis, that's 50,000 paid by the club in relation to club services. So 50,000 plus VAT. The VAT will be recoverable. It'll be a corp tax deduction. The other 50,000 is paid on behalf of the player. So that's not deductible for VAT purposes. You don't recover the VAT on that. It would be a deductible cost as a benefit in kind and employment cost for the club. And then for the player, you've got income tax to pay on 60,000, which is the VAT inclusive amount. But even thinking about that, at 45%, the tax on that is about £27,000. So if under the rep agreement, the player's rep agreement says he's going to pay the agent 5%, then it's that's a lot cheaper than paying 120,000. The current position, just very briefly, Ben, is HMRC are looking to challenge this, and the way they're now looking to challenge it is to say, well, you've got a rep agreement which says 5%, and actually what's being paid is 5%, but the player's only been taxed on 2.5% effectively. And therefore we want to ask the club, for evidence of club services. We want to ask the agent what they've done differently acting for club and player than they would have just acting for the player. And the difference is, acting for club and player, the agent is no longer exclusively representing the player. That's why the player doesn't have to pay 5, they pay 2.5, and the club pay 2.5. And the bit that HMRC just don't accept and don't understand for some reason is that there is always an element of club services on any deal. If the club want to sign a player, JB, I'm sure will say, he is providing services to the club on that deal.
Can I just add, I suppose what's quite interesting from my side, and Pete and JB, you'll have seen this more, which we've noticed over the past few years, especially, is these footballers' representation agreements, within their tax returns, are getting more and more scrutiny. Historically, it used to be
definitely
bigger players. Now you almost see any player who submits a tax return, even if it's just a simplistic tax return, gets a letter back asking for their representation agreements. So that
definitely.
Scrutiny.
I mean, I've been going through that with a couple of clients, this year.
Yeah,
I think it's becoming more and more normal. And I think, touching on sort of one of your points, Pete, for us, I think it's all about transparency with our clients. They should know exactly what we're earning and when we're earning it. But then I guess that team of life that we put around each player, we make sure that, I guess, their accountants are aware, so their tax code is changed at that time. So come January, they're not sitting there with a huge tax bill that they aren't aware of. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes that does happen in football, where players get to January and are told by somebody or told by HMRC, I guess, that they owe a lot of money. But fundamentally, that's not been, I guess, from our side, shared correctly by whoever that agent might be in that deal. And I think the FA have done quite a good job this year in terms of the annual returns that agents have to do now, which is effectively providing an annual return to each client to state exactly what you've earned over the last 12 months. So I think, again, it just brings more transparency into the game, which is a good thing.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, just on that, the number of enquiries is going up, and that's why we're doing some work at the moment with the Premier League to try and reduce that, and talking to HMRC about it, because the compliance burden on everybody is absolutely crazy, I think. One point we did mention to HMRC actually is, a lot of the agents we work with are very secure and comfortable in their relationships with a player. If you go down this route, what if the agent, all of their rep agreements now go to 1% rather than 5%? Next time there's a deal, it's 5% of salary, there's only 1% tax on the player, because that's what it says in his rep agreement. So you got to be really careful. And certainly, talking to a couple of clubs, they're angry that HMRC seem to have gone back on this 50-50 agreed method. If you look at something like the recruitment industry, if you're somebody who's applying for a job, you as the individual never pay that recruitment fee. It's always the firm that recruit you. It's not benefit in kind. So why is football any different? So it may be that clubs decide to take a more aggressive approach. So it's something that's an ongoing process, I think.
I'm guessing that's just because it's high profile. I think that's probably the big difference, isn't it? But Carlos, Eduardo, have you got any thoughts on that from a Spanish perspective? If a UK agent like JB is taking a player over to Spain, what difference more on that contract?
First advice from the taxation standpoint is be careful. First one. So in Spain, for the moment, as long as the Spanish tax authorities consider that it's usual that the player has his own agent, they consider that the 100% is taxable as a benefit in kind for the player. Following Pete's example, that would mean if you have £100,000 per year, you have to pay taxes on an amount around £45,000, which is double of the taxation that would be paid in the United Kingdom. But here we are being aware that a case, which I don't know if it will be maintained in the future in further cases and further situations, that a club has been accepted with the duality scheme, considering that, as we have you guys discussed, the service of the agent is not just for the player. The agent also has services and value to be given to the club. So I strongly hope that this makes a path for future tax audits and situations, and the 50% duality is accepted in the future. But for the moment, for the time being, you have to take into account 100% taxable as a benefit in kind. we will see later, but for the moment, it's just the way it is.
So we've got about 10 minutes left on the time, so I want to leave some time for the Q&A, but I just wanted to touch on, I suppose, how the idea for today came about, that quite a lot of the people on this call were involved in quite a complex case over the summer involving a player that was represented by some of the people on this call, and I thought it was worth us spending a bit of time just touching on that, because there's a lot of I suppose, complicated matters that needed to be taken into account on quite a complex, fast-paced deal. So, Adam, if perhaps you can give a bit of background on what happened on that situation.
Yes, well, I suppose early summer, myself and Pete on a player that we both work with, and we got a WhatsApp on a Sunday evening telling us that one of our clients had found a property that they'd fallen in love with in Ibiza, which was, I think it was about 3.5 million euros was the purchase price. And they were desperate that they wanted it. So they needed to exchange on Wednesday, 3 days later, on obviously a Spanish property, well, a Spanish islands property in the Balearics. And it was like, can you deal with it? And that effectively sort of chucked everything into myself and Pete's lap, which was quite interesting because firstly, we had to decide how the property was going to be bought, whether it was going to be personal or through a company. And then you had all of the other wider issues of buying, you know, a Spanish property, the legal implications, the tax implications, and the problems that may arise, you know, in buying that, contractual information and what specific rules were needed in that jurisdiction. So we then engaged with, you know, Carlos and Eduardo and the firm to help us, and we managed to sort of get the deal done. And before this call, we had a brief chat about how many emails were exchanged, and I don't think any of us kept track of it. But I think there was a period in time where we were probably up to about 70, 80 a day, I would say, at one period of time, going on very late into the night. And I think on the two occasions we had to catch up with the footballer to update him, given all of the pressure was put on us to conclude the deal. We had a 9:30 Zoom call with the footballer, and he was still in bed, sort of barely woken up, just nodding in agreement to everything, and then off we had to go and crack on. So that was like the high level stuff. Things that we had to do. We had to ensure the funds were available. We had to keep a track of currency because it was large transactions to exchange. We ended up buying the property through a company, so there were issues in terms of where the source of wealth had to go, because it had to go to a notary, which I think Eduardo will touch on. And then there were other issues from a tax and reporting point of view, which Pete and Eduardo can touch on. But you know, Eduardo and Carlos were the people that probably did, I would say, 80% of the work.
Let's fire over to Carlos and Eduardo. So Adam's given a brief introduction to that, but it sounds as though there was probably quite a lot of complications. So again, we've got 5 minutes left. So if we can try and just explain those complications in a couple of minutes, we can then move on to a few Q&A from the audience.
Yeah, sure. From the foreigner people, there are a very, very long requirements to buy a property in Spain. And as you know, our clients are from any part of the world, and many of them wants to buy a property also in Ibiza or any Balearic Islands or Canary Islands. From legal side, first, they have to fulfill any requirements. For example, they have to obtain a NIE. NIE is a number of identification of foreigners, people in Spain, if they are a natural person, or NIF. Or NIF is a tax number if they want to buy through a company. Okay. For the NIE, you have to go before to the police station and do it all the tramites in persons. And with COVID situation, it's quite difficult to obtain an appointment. For the NIF, you have to go before the tax agency with all of the documentation of the company, the power of attorney of the legal representative, make the high apostille. You have to make a lot of tramits to go before you go to the notary. Okay, perfectly with the NIE and the NIF, you can spend maybe 2, 3, or 4 weeks, and with the COVID situation, more. Okay, and when you did the first step, you also has to hire an expert to analyze if the property has any legal or tax or technical problem. Okay, because in Ibiza there are some requirements, especially requirements as follows. First of all, in Ibiza, there is in Ibiza or any of the part near to the sea. Okay, there are the coast law. Okay, in general, the protection easement covers up to 100 meters from the inner limit of the seashore. In subsections classified as urban land prior to the entry into force of the law, this width has been reduced to 20 meters. Okay, and the other requirement for the non-European foreigners, also the British people from January 1st, you have to obtain a permission of the Ministry of Defense to buy a property in Spain. Okay, you have to do is a little bit of tramits. There are more easier than the previously, but you have to obtain the permission of the ministry to buy the property. And following approval, all of these points, you have to go to the notary, makes the payment, and you have to clarify previously the funds, okay, for the anti-money laundering law, okay, and then register to the new property before the land registry, sorry. And additionally, for the foreigner people, has to inform to the Ministry of the Economy for the transaction, okay, for its information. Then, when with the operation that we help on the summertime, maybe we can spend more or less one month or maybe a little bit more to obtain all of these questions. And it's quite funny for us, but it's quite difficult. Maybe from January 1st, the requirements are a little bit difficult from now.
So Pete, I'm going to come to you before we lose you completely for light. I can't really see your face at the moment, but it's getting darker every minute. But I'm just going to come to you about, Adam mentioned buying a property through a company in the UK for a property overseas. There must be tax implications of that. If you can explain that in a little bit of detail. You're on mute, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I was just messing with the lighting. Next time I'll put another pound in the meter, and then you'll be able to see me for a bit longer. Yeah, just from a tax perspective, we were toying with whether the individual should buy personally. There was a suggestion they should buy through the image rights company. We're always very clear that the image rights company is a commercial entity and it should be kept as such. But obviously, quite a lot of players build up significant funds in the image rights company. And just because it's a commercial entity doesn't mean the cash has to sit in the bank account earning zero at the moment. The use can be made of that cash. So in this particular situation, we set up a separate entity, a property company. We made a loan across from the image rights company, and we used that company then to acquire the property. Of course, that means the property belongs to that company, and therefore when the player's using the property, they charge a market rent for the use of the property. But that's sufficient to be paying running costs, etc. So it works quite efficiently given the purchase price coming from after-tax money in the image rights company, so effectively 81% of the gross income after 19% corp tax, versus as an individual level at 55% of the gross after income tax.
Okay, so I'm conscious that it's 4 o'clock now, so I want to allow a little bit of time for questions. So that's covered off the main areas that I wanted to touch on. I think it really highlights why players, in particular coming from overseas, need that right team around them. So we do have quite a few questions. So I'm going to start with one from Lorenzo that's for you, Pete, which is many countries such as Italy, where he practices, have recently put in place beneficial tax treatment for sports professionals, so a flat tax rate or workers regime. Meant to many professionals, especially footballers, transferring their tax residence to Italy to benefit from the regime. Have you experienced problems with that, with a double taxation system?
No, and we just see the opposite, actually. As he said, we've seen a lot of players either consider or actually move to Italy. You know, we had a potential deal going back, well, it would have been, 3 summers ago when Cristiano Ronaldo moved to Juventus. We had a player who was hoping to move to Juventus that summer, and unfortunately the budget all went Cristiano's way, I think. But he had, you know, up to £6 million in his UK image rights company. And one of the major advantages of moving to Italy, other than obviously joining Juventus, but he did have some offers with other big clubs, would have been to go there and to take advantage of the Italy's new version of the res non dom regime, which effectively is you pay €100,000 and any non-Italian source income is then not subject to tax in Italy. So we could have paid him a £6 million dividend from his company in the UK. All of that would have come out with no further tax to pay. So, you know, we've seen other countries around the world implement such regimes. I know Spain used to have one. We call it the Beckham rule, which was when David went over there. Russia at the moment have a 13% flat tax rate for professional footballers, and you know it is always an incentive and helpful for bringing players into the UK, and that's why, you know, into various jurisdictions, and that's why from a UK perspective we always talk about things like overseas workday relief, image rights still being effective as a way of increasing that net of tax salary.
JB, I'm going to come to you now for a question regarding loan deals. So if you've got a loan player going overseas where 2 clubs in 2 different countries both are contributing to his salary, can you just explain a bit about how that would work, if that's common?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I guess, in the sense of the deal would be done really between the 2 clubs, you know, I guess in terms of the salary contributions or if they're covering the full salary. So I guess we would negotiate with the club the player's going on loan to and make sure that, I guess, he receives everything that we believe he should, whether it's bonuses and everything attached, you know, to that. But I guess also, you know, when it comes to the salary would, you know, the deal is between the 2 clubs. Money gets paid from one club to its parent club effectively, who will still pay a salary in that sense.
I think we're going to probably have time for 2 questions. So I just want to touch on the Brexit side of things and the points-based system. Do we think that that's going to inflate transfer values for players that then qualify for that points-based system? Anyone fancies that one?
I'd probably say yes.
We're going to push for them higher. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I think players that qualify, you know, I think there will be lots of players that do qualify for, you know, and hit that 15 points. So I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue in that sense. But I do think it means that, I guess, the quality of player, you know, they have to hit a certain threshold. So the quality of player should be very good, and therefore, you know, I guess the price is attached to that.
And I think we'll finish on one question from Paul Crockford, which was, will the new FIFA regulations attacking duality mean that it's no longer possible? So Pete, I think that might be one for you.
I don't think it'll mean that it's no longer possible. I think I haven't seen the latest draft of the regs, but from the last one I saw a presentation this time last year from FIFA Pro, and they were talking about, I think there's a fixed amount that the agent can charge to be split between club and player. I think, is it 6% split 3 and 3? The difficulty is where you want to change that percentage, or you want to charge a bigger, because quite often on some of the bigger deals, there'll be an annual fee and then there'll be a lump sum payment, and that will be more difficult, or in fact impossible to do. But obviously we'll have to see what happens with these regs, because obviously the European Agents Association are quite vociferously against them. So I think there's a way to go on that one.
Unless anybody's got anything else to mention on that particular point, I think we'll bring today's session to an end. I'm going to bring back everybody's contact details onto screen. And then if anybody wants to get in contact following today's session, they can do so. Regarding the recording of today, if you want a copy of that, either for yourself or for your colleagues, contact me in the first instance and I'll get that across to you. Thank you to everybody for dialing in and listening. Thanks, of course, to Adam, Pete, Carlos, Eduardo, and Jonathan for giving up their time today. Wish you all and everybody listening a happy Christmas and a COVID-safe New Year, and look forward to catching up soon.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure.
See you later.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Very much. Bye.